Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Marlon Bailey, who's Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. He's the author of Butch Queens Up and Pumps, Gender Performance and Ballroom Culture in Detroit, published by the University of Michigan Press. How are you doing today,
Good,
Marlon?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here.
Of Butch Queens Up and Pumps, Dwight McBride, currently the provost at Emory University, writes, "At once revelatory and heartbreaking, Bailey's ethnographic details leap off the page, putting the reader dead center inside the kaleidoscope world that is ballroom. Bailey's research is undergirded by the very ethics of care, practiced by the members of the ball houses he studies, as well as a nuanced theorizing that sacrifices none of the material implications of the political economy of racialized spaces, specifically in the ballroom of Detroit." So talk a little bit about this book. What I found interesting about your background, you have a background in performance and acting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was kind of doing that life at a certain period of time. We can remember when Paris is Burning is released in the late 80s, and you tell this story about teaching Paris is Burning in a Black Studies class, and we could imagine what this might have looked like in the early 1990s. So talk a little bit about that experience.
So, as most people, my first exposure to ballroom culture was through Paris is Burning. And I happened to be teaching a class at the University of Michigan Flint. This was back in 1998. And I actually was trying to do intersectionality, and I didn't really know what that was at the time. And so I started the class. I had broken it up into modules, so we dealt with race, and the students were cool. They got it. They understood racial oppression and class. They understood how there was connections between racial oppression and socioeconomic deprivation. They understood that. Got into gender and mostly talked about women, not non-gender conforming people.
Right.
Then I get to sexuality, the sexuality module, and I show Paris is Burning. And most of the students in the class just went crazy. They were viscerally upset that I had brought this film into the class to show them about this community that existed, that that had people in the community, some of whom they may know, and even though it was in New York, but some of whom have similar identities,
The folks that they knew,
folks
they've grown up with,
right? But what happened? They had such a viscerally negative response to it. It raised questions in my mind about, well, what am I doing here? What is my project? And this was before I went to get my PhD, so I was teaching with my MFA. And I began to ask myself, what am I doing here? How do I bridge or bring together my own gender and sexual identity development and understanding of myself with the research that I do? With the research that I'm interested in.
For audiences who don't quite know, because there's a way in which when folks hear ballroom culture, it starts and ends with RuPaul.
Yes, absolutely.
But for folks who don't know, what exactly is ballroom culture, and what is kind of the house system that is at the foundation of it?
So in the book, I argue that ballroom culture is a Black and Latina LGBT cultural formation. So I look at it as a cultural formation that is centered around performance, but there are so many things that this community does. For example, they redefine what family and community are.
Right.
Many of the members of the community have been ostracized or marginalized within their families of origin. So then what they do is they create a whole different definition of what a family is, and the family is a house.
Hence the term house, right?
Yeah. The other thing is that these houses, and I say in the book, there are no balls without houses, there are no houses without balls. Yeah. So these two entities, the house, the family, and the balls, the performances, and what kind of affirms, what I call them ball rituals. They kind of affirm the community and the identities and people that participate in the community. Those are organized by houses, and they're competitive around a whole range of performance presentation categories. Ballroom is most known for voguing. Actually, the community created this performance dance form.
That Madonna.
Right.
International phenomenon.
And actually, there were ballroom members in New York who were in her video.
Right.
And so they come together, they compete as houses, and part of the fortification of the community is around this competition.
Right. And in some ways, it's no different than what we think of as traditional kin structures like fraternities and sororities.
Exactly. And what I also argue too is that this phenomenon didn't come out of nowhere. That black LGBT, I grew up in the black LGBT community in Detroit, Michigan, and even before I knew anything about ballroom, I had a gay father, a gay mother. I had people who I could talk to who could tell me the ways of the world and the gay world.
Because a term like in the family, I mean, you're talking about going back 50 years when a term like that is circulating in black communities.
And in the life.
Right.
So this community, though, what I find interesting is there's also different genders and sexual identities. So the gender system is a collection of gender identities, or what I call gender expressive possibilities that extend beyond the male, female, man, woman, gay, straight, bisexual. Right. It's a very complicated array.
And in some ways, the way that we talk about gender now and the way notions of static genders are shifting, it's almost cutting edge.
Yeah.
What was happening in these house spaces, decades earlier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I really argue that the ballroom community actually taught me about what gender and sexuality are. That as a researcher, as an ethnographer, I go to these communities and I have this research community co-performative interaction with community members, but then I learn about myself. I learn about the possibilities of gender life and sexual life by studying and examining and engaging with this community in terms of what they do and how they arrange and think about gender and sexuality.
The obvious question is asked, why Detroit, right? Part of it is that, it's a place that you knew how to navigate, right? Because you were from Detroit. But was there something unique about Detroit that really made you go into Detroit to do your particular ethnographic study?
Yeah, so you talked about the practical part of it. The ballroom community, particularly at the time that I was doing this research, was still clandestine. And so I knew people, I was able to get underground and gain the trust because some people knew me because I had grew up in the neighborhood, grew up in the city. But the other thing, and this is a larger critique that I have of a lot of LGBT studies and LGBT community recognition, is that it overemphasizes the East Coast or the coast.
Yeah, right.
It overemphasizes New York. Now, no shade on New York. I know New York is, is an incredible place. But what happens is that the overemphasization on New York crowds out all of the incredible, ingenious things and practices that happen among black communities throughout the country.
Yeah.
The Midwest is a woefully understudied region in the United States, particularly black Midwest, and particularly black LGBT Midwest. A lot of people didn't even realize that Detroit has a very thriving, some of it still kind of underground, black LGBT community.
Right.
And the other thing too is that I didn't know that this community existed when I saw Paris is Burning, and then I started to ask around, and people said, "Oh yeah, there are houses here in Detroit." I was like, "What?" And then I began to see that there's this huge, at that time, very underground formation that was very rich and connected to the larger network. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize too is that the ballroom community, when I was doing my research back in the early 2000s, ballroom community was a massive network throughout North America. Yeah. So there is a ballroom community in every major city with a large black population in the country. So you have interestingly enough, you have ballroom in Louisville, Kentucky.
Right.
You have ballroom in Cleveland, in Columbus, Ohio, Indianapolis.
So what you find is these ballroom structures are in fact almost always embedded in Black and brown communities.
Always embedded,
Right.
because they they become the lifeline.
Right.
They become the mechanism through which Black LGBT people can actually, enhance the quality of their lives.
Because they have to leave their family, right? They have to leave their home, but they can't leave the community.
Right.
Right. So you can't have a ballroom space in some sort of white middle class enclave, right? Because they couldn't be there anyway.
Couldn't be there. Right. And it also points out how segregated the LGBT community is. And often when we think of, in our national imaginary, when we think of LGBT, we think white. Yeah. There's this, there are these huge communities that are Black and brown that make up the sort of mosaic of LGBT life throughout the United States that you don't get to know unless you actually go into those communities and engage with them.
There's some Black cities that I think about as being incubators for non-traditional Blackness. Mm-hmm. I think of Oakland as one of those cities. Yep. I think of Baltimore as one of those cities, and I think about Detroit. And as you talk about Detroit, I always think about the role that techno has played in Black musical culture. Mm-hmm. It still really hasn't gotten its due for its influence. Did you find there were moments where there was kind of a bleeding between the house culture and what we know still exists of techno culture in Detroit?
Absolutely. So part of the music, the techno house music scenes overlap with ballroom. Yeah. In actuality, a lot of the performance categories are underscored by house music songs, right? And still to this day, even though I recognize a shift in techno and other forms of house music consumption from gay, LGBT, Black LGBT people to more heterosexual and also white, and also more international now. But when I was doing my research, it was still very much a signature. When I was growing up, that was my introduction to house music.
Right. You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Marlon Bailey, who's Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies in the School of Transformation at Arizona State University. He's the author of book Butch Queens Up and Pumped, Gender Performance and Ballroom Culture in Detroit. We were talking a few nights ago because you are older than you present. And you're an ethnographer, so that means, if you're talking about ballroom culture, that means you have to be up in these clubs.
Oh my God.
Talk a little bit of the challenge, as you've gotten older, of having and needing to be in these spaces, trying to look like you're supposed to be in these spaces, right? And just the energy associated with, really having to stay up all night. Like Ray Charles, nighttime is the right time, right?
And so I started doing this research when I was 30, like a little in my early 30s. And, ballroom, the chronological age is not the basis by which one determines status and inclusion, right? It's based on how long you've been in the scene and recognition. But it started to take a toll on my body because balls happen in the middle of the night. They never, as I say in the book, they never start on time. Now once they get started, there's this smooth kind of consistent trajectory that the ball takes, but it also ends very late. So in the book I talk about this this ball that my house at the time, I was a member of the legendary House of Prestige in Detroit, the Detroit chapter, and we hosted this ball. And so we were also responsible for creating the space. And so I got there early, I got there in the afternoon, waited for 2 hours for the rest of the people to get there, and then I did not leave that space until like 9 a.m. the next morning. So there's another project that I think I still, my second book is more squarely on HIV and the impact of HIV/AIDS on Black gay men's sexuality. So that's not quite a middle of the nighttime kind of thing. But I have this third book project, if I still have it in me, and I'm almost 50 years old, is Black Pageantry. So it's another cultural formation that many people don't know about.
Right.
It's massive. It's all through the South.
Yeah.
And it is Black. It is kind of late at night, not as late
Right.
as Ballroom. But I want to do an ethnography on the Black pageantry scene. And so I'm not sure if at early 50s I'm going to be able to do that kind of. But it's really important though for you to be a part of, and when you're doing ethnography, for you to be embedded, for you to be actually a part of the community and to really get to know the nuances and the aspects of the community that's not spectacularized in the media, and so that was the only way that I was able to do a very nuanced study, a critical study, and a careful and caring study of this community.
You're visiting Duke as part of the Summer Institute for Teaching and Professional Advancement. How important has mentoring been for your career and both sides of it now? Because you're now on the side where folks are looking for counseling and guidance, from you. But how important has mentoring been, particularly the kind of work that you do?
Oh, I don't. This project would not have been done without the mentoring of Lee Patrick Johnson. He has been just a bulwark. I don't know how he does it. He's a little older than me, and the work is just on fire, energy level.
Right.
But so mentoring has been really important, and E. Patrick Johnson just won. Many people like Kathy Cohen, Dwight McBride.
Right.
I mean, I can go down the line and down the list, and it has been invaluable. I don't think. For someone who is working class, first generation, my first 2 degrees are in theater and totally different. I mean, there's some connections, but
not.
I wasn't trained with my first 2 degrees to do research in the way that I became trained to do research, and particularly performance ethnography.
Yeah.
So it has been really important, which is why I'm committed to, and why this program is really important. I'm committing to giving back and to helping to nurture and create the next generation of scholars, particularly scholars who are interested in Black LGBT cultures and communities.
We've been joined by Marlon Bailey, Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies in the School of Transformation at Arizona State University. Thanks for joining us, Marlon.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back.